Call the January 15th, 2026 Land Use Advisory Committee meeting to order. First, we're going to do the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement. I'll go ahead and read it. The Metropolitan Council acknowledges that the land we currently call Minnesota, and specifically the 7-county region, is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota Oyate, who are present and active contributors to our thriving region. As part of the Metropolitan Council's commitment to address the unresolved legacy of genocide, dispossession, and settler colonialism, and the fact that government institutions, including the Metropolitan Council, benefited economically, politically, and institutionally after the forcible removal of the Dakota Oyate, the Metropolitan Council is dedicated to instilling land, water, and people commitments in regional policy. These commitments support the Dakota Oyate, the 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, Ho-Chunk Nation, and the American Indian communities representing over 150 diverse tribal nations that call the 7-county region home. All right, one of the first things is approval of the agenda. Do we have everyone's had a chance to review the agenda? No modifications, nothing? Thank you. Would be looking for an approval of the minutes for November 20th meeting.
So moved.
So moved. Any second?
Second.
Second. All right. Any discussion? None. All those in favor, please signify by aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Ayes have it. That passes. All right. Up first, we have appointment of Vice Chair William Drostet. He will be our Vice Chair. Hopefully, I am not sick, but if I am, this will be yours to run. Thank you, sir. All right. And the second non-consent business item that we have. Do we need to vote on that?
Yes. Yep.
Sorry about that. Any discussion in regards to that appointment? No? All right, entertain a motion.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, please signify by aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Bill.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we've got the 2026-19 MUSA implementation guidelines updates. Mackenzie Young.
Hello all, I'm back after actually I was back last meeting, so not too long of a hiatus. We're going to be talking again about the MUSA implementation guidelines. What we have on the agenda today is a very, very brief background. I won't belabor it because we did just go over it. We'll be discussing the proposed changes to the MUSA implementation guideline with a special focus on some stuff that's changed since last time we talked. And we'll bring you up to speed on what we've heard from various focus groups as well as other committees that have reviewed this. And then we have our proposed motion for your consideration as well. So just very, very quickly reminder of the MUSA. At its heart, the Metropolitan Urban Service Area is what is currently served by sanitary sewer service and what we are committing to serve within the planning period. The MUSA is more than just a sewer system, but a lot of times that's what we're talking about, and it's what communities are most interested in when we have MUSA discussions. But it is ultimately our commitment to provide service. And at the local level, it's usually reflected in the comprehensive plans through their staging plan. Usually this is broken out into 10-year staging periods, and those are determined at the community level based on their growth rate, land use consumption, and it's an iterative process. We are continually evaluating developments as they come in, propose plans for development, verifying it against our own system capacity to make sure that our system capacity and investments are matching when we're expecting developments and growth to come online throughout the region. And the way we evaluate the requests we get to change staging plans and to add areas to the MUSA is our MUSA implementation guidelines. At its heart, the MUSA implementation guidelines are designed to balance making sure that there is enough land available for development, that we're not constraining development and increasing the price of land, but also not that we have so much land available that we're contributing to urban sprawl and causing for us to prematurely make infrastructure investments that wouldn't actually be needed for several decades. So it's all about that core principle of orderly and efficient growth within the region. So as we mentioned last time, about every 10 years, we take a serious look at these things. It usually coincides with the adoption of the new regional development guides, with the adoption of Imagine 2050 and its policy. It was time to take a look at our old MUSA guidelines and update them to reflect the new policy. Major changes this cycle are, we're really trying to consolidate all of our policies related to the MUSA into a single document. We have some new proposals for exclusions from density calculations. One change since last time we talked about this is based on feedback that we got from focus groups as well as some conversations with our folks in transportation. We're proposing adding collector right-of-way to the road right-of-ways that can be excluded from density calculations. So previously, only arterial right-of-way had been eligible for exclusion. We are proposing through the revised guideline attachment that both arterial and collector right-of-way would be excluded. The rationale for that is the collectors really do serve more of a regional function. They gather traffic from multiple neighborhoods, bring it together. They serve more than just the individual development. And in a lot of cases, they've been platted significantly before the development comes in. So it makes sense to treat them more like arterial than we would a cul-de-sac or a truly local road. We can talk about that in as much detail as you wanted, but I did just want to highlight that as probably as the biggest change in our proposed guidelines between now and the last time we discussed them. Another big change we're looking at is allowing the preliminary plats to be used as the review lens for multi-phase projects rather than doing our density compliance reviews based solely on a single phase's final plat.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Yep. So one of the other changes we're talking about is currently how we look at things is when a sewer extension permit comes in, we look at the final plat, which is oftentimes only associated with one portion of a larger development. So if you had like a 100-acre development, maybe the developer moves forward with the first 20 acres, and we'd only be looking at that. Sometimes because of where infrastructure is placed within the development, stormwater ponds or just topography features that dictate what lot sizes there are, you'll get one phase that's maybe a little larger lots or a little smaller lots, and that would cause us to flag stuff as not in compliance with the density range. When in fact, if we looked at the whole development, we'd realize, oh, those slightly larger lots in the first phase are being balanced out by smaller lots in the second phase. And it is consistent. So we matched our review lens to the review lens that local governments are using when they approve developments. And we think that'll streamline process and remove a friction point that doesn't need to be there.
Thank you.
Yep. We are also a big shift from the existing 2023 guidelines is we are looking a little closer at asking communities to demonstrate need for expanding the MUSA. Most of those criteria involve making sure that we have a 20-year rolling land supply. The goal there is really to make sure that we're not investing in infrastructure to expand the MUSA into vast swaths of farmland that maybe aren't ripe for development. So we really want to look down and make sure that there is the market demand and the land use need before we expand the MUSA and make associated investments. It's a way of, again, reducing sprawl. And we outlined the different criterias that we would look at to make those evaluations. And part of the reason why we feel comfortable doing this is when we did all of the analysis and going into Imagine 2050, the land that's currently within the 2050 MUSA more than accommodates the forecasted growth out past 2050. So in the vast majorities of communities, there's already enough land within the current MUSA to accommodate their forecasted growth. But we recognize there's always like local exemptions, and that's why we have the policy that allows for an expansion when there's demonstrated need. And then the last major change is the land use inefficiency surcharge, which is being proposed. That is a mechanism by which in cases where the council is mandated to provide service to an area that we never planned to provide sewer service, the council has the option of conducting a study to determine the costs associated with expanding that service and then imposing a surcharge that would recoup those expenses. The idea is that the areas of the metro that have developed in accordance with regional policy should not be covering the cost of providing service to areas that maybe did not. But we recognize that would always be a very unique circumstance, a very rare circumstance, and it would be done case by case, determined by a study. The idea is to give us an option to make sure that we have that ability, but it does not commit the council to necessarily charging an inefficiency surcharge. It'd all be based on the results of a study. So those are high level, the major changes that are being contemplated with the new MUSA guidelines. As I mentioned, this has gone before several bodies. I just thought I'd quick go through some of the feedback we've received. This went before the Community Development Committee on November 11th. One of the questions there was if there are areas that city staff had asked to be excluded from net density calculations that the council was not excluding. When I first talked to you last month, the answer was roadways and HOA ponds and parks. That answer is now slightly modified in that we, did really take a close look at that collector right-of-way and are now proposing to exclude that. Local roads are still going to be included. We see those as, integral and necessary to the development itself. And we, retain the stance that stormwater ponds that are not publicly owned, that are under private ownership, are not a public amenity and therefore need to be included in the density calculations. Same with private parks owned by an HOA. We had a discussion on the process we would use for reviewing MUSA expansion requests, and we'd went through the different criteria and mechanisms cities could use to demonstrate need, as well as the criteria the council would be looking at. And then we were also directed to have the environmental committee give us feedback on the proposed land use and efficiency surcharge. That went before the environmental committee on January 13th, which did not leave me enough time to include it in the report or this presentation. But just reporting out really what their goal was to make sure that the land use and what their feedback to us was that the land use and efficiency surcharge needed to be case by case. It needed to be based on, the very unique circumstances that were in play for any given community, and that they had concern that we made sure that it was done in such a way that it wouldn't slow down necessary connections. So if we have a community where we're being mandated to connect because there are many failing systems, they wanted to make sure that it wouldn't be a 5-year study that was causing environmental degradation, which obviously we share as well and would work to do. And the other feedback we got was they liked the idea that we were making sure that there weren't any, in their words, backdoors, ways to get to regional sewer, that people had to follow policy and that the system's, efficiency and integrity was being protected. So that's the high-level feedback that we got from the environmental committee a couple days ago. As I mentioned, we did talk about this on November 20th. I will spare you me reading through our discussion, but we did go over a couple points relating to stormwater ponds and some discussions of how we would evaluate MUSA expansion requests. I'm happy to go into any more depth on that if needed. Another thing we did is we did 2 focus groups with local governments. It was the same focus group twice. After the November 12th one, they indicated that they had more feedback to give, so we scheduled a second meeting so we could discuss more. A lot of the discussion really centered around the density averaging within land use. Communities noted that a lot of times when they review developments, they're looking at a large parcel that might have many land uses, and they like the idea of having enough flexibility to use a PUD to move units around within that. While we appreciate why that may speed up the process at the local level, it's our firm belief that state statutes consistency requirements require that within any development or parcel, the density range and product types match the assigned land use in the land use plan. We don't believe there's a way to move things around within that without doing a comprehensive plan amendment. So that's one where the communities really stressed that this is how they would prefer to be able to do things, but simply put, we don't believe it's possible under the state law. So, yep.
To move things within that potential development, or I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah, so it would have been smart of me to make a visual example because this can get a little hard to follow, but I'll try to talk through it quick. Actually, so looking at this feedback slide, let's pretend the red plus is a high density area. That little yellow C is a medium density area. Sometimes, a community might take a parcel and say, we think that red X is going to be over there and we think that yellow C area is going to be below it. And the developer might come in and say, yeah, we don't know if the market's quite there for that big of a red plus. We'd like the top portion of the red plus to stay as high density, but we're looking at having low density in the bottom half of that red plus. And our position is you would need a comprehensive plan amendment to make the bottom half of the red plus yellow to match your low density. However, comprehensive plan amendments require a supermajority vote, which can sometimes be hard to get. And what we've been told is it would be nice if instead of handling it at the land use level, it could be a zoning decision where they do a planned unit development. And yeah, the single family is going into that red area, but based on the unit count required in the planned unit development, the total average units throughout the development are similar to what would have been had the red plus not been changed. But again, state law is pretty explicit that the zoning map and the land use map need to be consistent.
In that example, is that, you're saying like those two, the plus and the C, would those be two different parcels, or are you saying that's in the same parcel?
It could be one parcel.
Okay.
A lot of times with larger parcels, what cities will do is to signal to developers that they want a mixed neighborhood with some low density, some medium density, some high density. We'll say it's a 40-acre parcel just because my brain works that way. They'll maybe say the 10 acres in the northeast is high density, the 10 acres in the northwest is going to be medium density, and the 20 southern acres will be low density. The city doesn't actually intend, for there to be a nice 10-acre square, 10-acre square, 20-acre square, but they're signaling that when this development comes in, they want to see a blend of housing types. Because what actually develops crosses those land use lines, there needs to be a way to reconcile the zoning that's being done with the land use. And the tool for that is a comprehensive plan amendment. There are other ways cities can do land use. They could, in theory, do a mixed use district with a broader range listing the product types and saying, we see this as being a development that's going to have low, medium, and high density between 10 to 30 acres. I'm, making up numbers. And then anything they did within that range would be fine and wouldn't require a comprehensive plan amendment. The reason why they tend to, in the suburban edge, like to break it up like I described, is because then they can use the minimum density calculations of the higher density to help them meet their area-wide density goals, the community-wide density goal of 3.5 now. So again, I understand why communities plan the land the way they do. It makes a lot of sense, but we try to be really clear when we see these land use plans come in that, they need to be prepared to do the comprehensive plan amendment to reconcile the final development with the land use plan.
One last one.
Yep.
Is that just applicable in the lens of the new MUSA implementation guidelines, so an area that you were adding to the MUSA, or is that for anywhere?
This is existing policy. It's what we use to review all sewer extension permits. One of the reasons why we're adding this directly to the MUSA implementation guidelines is for increased clarity and transparency. But this has been our existing policy and standard operating procedure.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yep.
And when a community asks to have an amendment to the plan because they've made a decision, or they're making a decision around development, is it that the comprehensive plan has to be amended before they can actually go forward and actually approve those final plans?
So the technical answer is yes. They should not be, under the state law, they're not supposed to issue approvals that are inconsistent with their comprehensive plan. In practice, the pinch point tends to be when they apply for a sewer extension permit, because that's when we see it. And then the MPCA, the Pollution Control Agency, asks us to certify that the development is consistent with the comp plan. So then we do a check, and if what we see doesn't match, I have to make a pretty rough phone call where I tell them we're putting their sewer extension permit on hold. And so one of the reasons, again, why we're wanting to get this out front is because the more communities are aware of this, the more they're aware of the lens, the more likely they are to make that comprehensive plan amendment before the sewer extension permit and catch it early enough in the process that it's not actually holding up development timelines. Because, as you may know from your local experience, when the sewer extension permit is applied is usually when there's bulldozers on the site and the developer is looking to begin recouping their investment. And so anything that slows that down is a significant issue. Seeing no further questions, and then this is another time where we had even more discussion on the road right-of-way questions, and they really clarified their concerns, and that was a big impetus for us looking again at that collector right-of-way and making that recommended adjustment. Finally, this went before the Regional Planners Advisory Group, which is another group of local communities. Their questions were largely similar to what we got from the focus group, questions around the density calculations, especially roadway right-of-ways, how we were looking to treat conservation easements and the public ownership requirements for netting out areas under conservation easements, and then the density averaging discussion that we just went through was also a major topic. With that, just so you know, next steps, I could have taken the January 13th off because that's happened, but February 2nd we'll be going before the Community Development Committee tentatively, and February 11th for the Metropolitan Council. And, we will continue to get and respond to feedback, including the feedback I get from this body today. That being said, I have a motion, or I can pause for questions, whatever the chair prefers.
Any questions? Go ahead, Tom.
One, or I've got several, but I think I can limit it to one at least to start. Well, give me 1 second here to finish my train of thought on here. I was making some notes. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, so if there's anyone else, if you could come back to me, I'll have it in a second.
Go ahead, Sean.
The inefficient land use fee you mentioned, can you clarify again when that, is that to extend the MUSA to an area that doesn't currently exist, or just to cover like an existing rural residential subdivision that's ended up in the MUSA?
Yeah, it is for an area that we were never planning to serve if it is a mandated connection from another agency. So, an example where it might come up is, let's say there's 400 acres of rural residential, right, 5-acre lots. Septic systems begin failing, and we're asked by the MPCA to serve that entire area. But none of our long-term sewer plants had ever contemplated building infrastructure out to provide service to that area. It would give us the option to do a study, look at, what it would cost to provide that service, and get an idea of the costs that were incurred because we had to provide service in other areas because that area chose to develop in that, 5-acre lot pattern, which is not consistent with regional policy. And it would allow us the option, if it was appropriate, to have a surcharge for that land use inefficiency that offset those costs.
And that would basically just be like an assessment of the actual cost or something like that? It's not a static algorithm.
Yeah, it'd be unique to the circumstances. It would be, I guess that's all I can say is, the idea of the study is to look at the individual characteristics, everything that went around it, the nature of why we're having to go and do it, and then determine what's an appropriate fee to charge.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Go ahead, Tom.
Piggybacking off that first, who is that charge going to, the city, the developer, or is it just that charge needs to be paid however the city and developer handle it?
It'd be charged to the city, and if they chose to defray that through assessments or whatever mechanism, that would be
Okay.
a local decision.
Sounds good. The other question I had was kind of an example regarding what's being excluded or not excluded in density. So I know there was some discussion in here and in your presentation about like an HOA owned and maintained stormwater pond. What about, this is a niche example, but I still think it's something that should be addressed. Say down the road, the HOA no longer exists or is not maintaining that in a sufficient way, the city ends up taking over maintenance and ownership of that 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road. How does it change the density calculation? Does it just get ignored? How is that handled?
Yeah, I mean, pragmatically speaking, it would never be factored in because when we're looking at that density calculation, in that type of case is going to be when that sewer extension permit's being pulled. So in order for them to get the sewer extension permit, we did the calculation, including that HOA pond, and they made density.
Okay.
The fact that the city's now taking it over is not going to be an issue with the possible exception of some, scenario where, let's say, I don't know why I make my life so complicated, but let's say there was an outlot that was hanging out and had never been developed that was part of that development, and that HOA pond, after 30 years, the HOA goes defunct, the city takes it over. 30 years later, a developer comes in, buys that outlot, goes to develop it, and they say, hey, actually, we'd like to do slightly larger lots. And by the way, because that lot had originally been in and it's serving the regional stormwater, maybe the math would work that it would be relevant. But if that happens once in 50 years, I'll be a little surprised. But it could.
Fair enough.
It could happen.
That's all I have for now.
Any other questions? No?
In that case, the proposed motion is that the Metropolitan Council adopt the 2026 MUSA implementation guidelines as shown in revised attachment 1, replacing the current Metropolitan Urban Service Area implementation guidelines.
Entertain a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Second?
All right, any discussion? None? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Up next, we got an information item, Imagine 2050 Outcomes Measurement Program. Kristen Ryba Torres and Sarah Nelson. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here today, Chair Morales and committee members. For the record, I am Kristen Ryba-Torres. I'm a research manager in community development, and I'm joined by my colleague Sarah Nelson, who is a senior researcher specializing in outcomes measurement. What we've prepared for you today is a maybe 45-minute item that includes an overview of this program, which was formally established through an amendment adopted at last night's council meeting, which I'm glad to say because it's far too late to edit these slides. So we're going to do that overview. Then we'll take a closer look at the measures involving land use. We will not be covering, if you were a little overwhelmed by like the attached presentation, please know that we are not going through all of those slides. But in fact, we designed that part of the presentation to be responsive to your interests this evening. So I will maybe turn it over back to Chair Morales or ask committee members to, kind of identify an objective or two or three that we want to explore together that will help us give a sense of like how the measures work together to describe the intended outcomes of that land use objective. So really for illustration, if we really want to go there, we are happy to come back and review all of them with you. Through this presentation today, we're really just interested in your feedback on these measures, ideas for additional measures, things that you're not seeing that you'd like to see, and also just how you'd like to be engaged in this work going forward. We're still at the very early stages. This is essentially day one of the established program. this conversation might feel a little abstract, so we might not get to like how you'd like to be engaged going forward, but that door stays open. So maybe we'll talk about it tonight, and if not, we will be back. To certainly, when we publish the information, we'll be kind of coming back around through all the advisories to share that with you. So I'll turn it to Sarah now.
So just an overview of the Imagine 2050 Outcomes Measurement Program. Just to say up front, this program is expansive in scope. And that's because Imagine 2050 is expansive in scope. The Outcomes Measurement Program touches most, if not all, of the 5 regional goals in Imagine 2050, as well as the 5 policy areas of the Metropolitan Council. So water, housing, parks and trails, transportation, and of course, land use. So Imagine 2050 has about 100 policies and close to 700 actions in it. So very big. So the Outcomes Measurement Program was established via an amendment to Imagine 2050, as Kristen said. And that amendment consists of 2 parts. The first is the program narrative. That's really the description of what the program is, why it's needed, and how it works. And this includes a bit about the commitments, the guiding principles, and the structure of the program, and we'll dig more into those in a bit. But the second part is the initial measurement appendix, which describes the list of data points that we plan to monitor. And there are many measures, there are more than 160, but they're organized and grouped based on how they relate to different elements of Imagine 2050. So our approach to measurement for this regional development guide is different than what we as the Met Council have done in the past, and for good reason. With the last regional development guide, Thrive MSP 2040, we had a short list of measures with varying degrees of relevancy, and it was really difficult to use that information to describe changes in the region that aligned with that policy direction. So with some lessons learned from past efforts, we refined the approach for Imagine 2050, and I just want to highlight 2 main things here. Number 1, this program is designed to be responsive to whatever unfolds during the next decade, while also keeping the regional goals and the policy outcomes as sort of the North Star. And it also captures the actions and change at various levels within the region. So that includes our work at the Met Council and those of our regional and local partners as well, really bringing to light some of the groundwork that might otherwise go unnoticed. But our goal is to have a more holistic description of what takes place in the region over the next decade as it relates to Imagine 2050, and to create a shared foundation for dialogue about those changes. So this slide outlines the program's 3 guiding principles. These are also described in the narrative piece of the amendment that I mentioned earlier. First is the need to be iterative as data sources, methods, or processes change. We really want to bake in that idea of continuous improvement so that this program can continue to put the best data and information forward throughout 10 years. Another central idea of this program is making sure that it is adaptable and responsive to the feedback or engagement that we have moving forward. We know that a lot can change in 10 years, new issues, new priorities can arise, and this program is designed to meet the needs of regional audiences even as they change. And finally, the program strives to provide meaningful information for us and for our stakeholders, and to tell us something about what's happening in the region. So this slide describes the program's commitments, and they're really about establishing and documenting the opportunity to build dialogues. This program is not just an exercise in collecting data. It's about how we at the council and in the region use it. So we also want to be very clear that there can be tension as our region changes and develops, and we will probably see some of those tension points reflected in this program. But this program isn't meant to resolve those trade-offs and balances. It's really meant to facilitate respectful dialogues. And this program also includes commitments on a couple different levels. Within the Met Council, we are committing to the cross-divisional support that this program requires. But we're also committing to our partners and residents of the region that we will be more transparent and that we will follow through with that core value of accountability that's in Imagine 2050. So just a little bit about the language that we use in this program. So measurement ideas are separated into different types. The first type is the regional indicator, and these are sort of the big population level trends that provide context about the region. These are also sort of the big needles that require collective action to move. In the middle, we have regional measures, which aim to capture how local partners advance the 2050 regional goals and policies. And finally, we have our Met Council measures, and these speak more directly to how we as an organization are advancing 2050 goals and policies. These measures describe the impacts of grants, programs, investments, or how we as the Met Council are leading by example in engagement practices. So taken together, these three layers of information make up measurement slates, which provide a more holistic understanding of change happening in the region at different levels and scales. And I just want to point out that today you'll see measurement slates for land use topics. But because of the nature of Met Council's role in this policy area, we'll see mostly regional indicators and regional measures. There are fewer Met Council measures for land use than there are in some other areas of our work.
Yeah, I think I'll pick it up here. Just a little bit of a roadmap of what the rest of the year looks like. Following the adoption of the amendment, this is essentially day one of implementation, right? And so the key areas of the work going forward this year are really about measure management, and that's kind of those first three dark blue buckets. They're, as we mentioned in this iterative principle, and we'll probably say again later in the presentation, not every measure is where it needs to be. So we're going to continue to work with our staff and with stakeholders to continue the refinement. We also need to stay plugged in as to how we're implementing Imagine 2050 and looking for those new measure opportunities that come from that work. And then also starting to scope several of the new data development efforts that we plan to undertake to support this program. There are not a ton here, but the ones that we have identified so far, they're going to require a lot of cooperation with local governments to make sure that they are right-sized. And that speaks back to that commitment about balancing the benefits and burdens of, is it worth everyone's time for us to get at this information? What is it going to contribute? Is it valuable? We do not want to, like Sarah said, this is not an exercise in just creating data for the purpose of doing that, right? The second bucket in these teal categories are really about systems. We need to make, because of the expansive nature of this program, we need to make sure it's sustainable. And how we are leveraging a lot of existing information. I want to say like about 80% of the measures in the program are based on data we already have. But just because we have it doesn't mean it doesn't live across like 50 different systems and softwares and everything else, right? And so getting to work on how do we tap into that? How do we make sure that the data are accurate? How do we make sure that we update things automatically, right? All of those intricacies that come with like the information infrastructure of the program, as well as the people infrastructure, right? This is a big change for Met Council to be doing this work with such intention. And so we're also going to need to have work groups and processes in place to review information. We're starting those conversations early. And then lastly, the green area here, the communications plan and the sort of public-facing pieces with a new program website and dashboards to visualize the information in the measurements. So now we're going to switch gears and we're going to get into the land use measures that we have identified so far in this initial slate. And we're going to describe, I'm going to describe just a little bit of like the process that was used to develop these. So with like 160 plus measures, it might sound like we didn't have any criteria for adding information to this program, but we did, in fact. The first and foremost, measures must represent or connect to policy direction or commitments described in Imagine 2050. And that covers a lot of our planning and policy work here at Met Council, but it's not everything that we do. So we're not trying to make this like the organization enterprise-wide performance management reporting system, right? We're really focused on the scope of Imagine 2050, which, as we said, is expansive, but it's tied to that. So for example, there may be things that are reported at a program level or that are reported to other committees. Those are not always going to be the right fit for this program. Second, we want the data to describe outcomes and not outputs, and use high-quality, reliable information to do that. And as I sort of suggested earlier, and I'll say again, there is room for improvement in some of these measures. And so again, we're going to continue to work on that refinement and start from where we are and push, like as Sarah mentioned, for that continuous improvement through our review process and iterative principle. And then lastly, we need the information to show change over the 10-year period. So in order to do that, we want to see 2 or more data points that are comparable over this decade at a minimum. And we also have considered the ability for the information to be disaggregated, whether it's spatial disaggregations, right, reflecting different areas of the region, or among population groups. Because the same outcomes are not going to be experienced by every location in the region and every population group in the region. We know that. So it's not a disqualifier if data can't be disaggregated, but we've specifically looked for data sources and measures that lend themselves to that. Okay, so I think this kind of brings us to this slide here, which is a review of the 2050 land use policy objectives, though I'm sure everybody here has memorized them, right? It was probably quizzed when they were sworn in as committee members. But just in case, we thought a slide would be helpful here. Just a couple of things before we kind of start unpacking that. Sarah and I are, we have 160 measures to keep track of. We might not be able to answer every question that folks have about every measure. So just want to be transparent about that. We might phone some friends who are more land use experts behind us, but just in case, if we can't answer a question today, we will follow up with you and do that. We want to hear about ideas or measure ideas that really draw you in. I'm excited to see what that looks like, or things that are missing that you would think would be part of this program or might provide some valuable information. And as Sarah said earlier, you'll see fewer Met Council measures that we might than we might see in some other areas here in land use. It's also possible that a measure idea that you share with us is in the program. It's just connected to a regional goal or like associated with some other part. I think that's true for housing and for water. A lot of things dovetail with land use. And so, but we still want to hear about it. So please be generous with your feedback and your ideas today. So I think with that, we have 8 possible objectives that we can explore. We were thinking 2 or 3 might be the right number just because, even for Sarah and I, it can be a little overwhelming to take on much more than that. And so I'm going to turn it back to you, Chair Morales, to either kick us off with an objective you're interested in or ask committee members to weigh in on what they'd like to explore today.
May, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for the housing wall. Will it based off on just the land use or the zoning that we currently have and make projections about where more housing is possible?
That is not, projections aren't part of the program.
Okay.
Yeah. So we do certainly have data points and information that we share in the spirit of comprehensive planning for communities, but we're kind of more real time today or slightly backwards looking and not necessarily using forecasts or other projections in the program. Yeah.
And how would you measure or use equity as a piece to say that we as a metro were successful in it or not? Or what would you use to measure that?
For the Housing for All?
equity.
For equity. Well, I will say that the equity measures that you'll see today are limited in the sense that a lot of them live in other areas of the program. And I think that, from our perspective, we're here to, like, the monitoring aspect of this program is to share the information. I think whether or not we're being successful is part of those regional dialogues, right? We're not the arbiters of what the success looks like. We need to be in communication with each other about what that is and how that is bearing out in trends. So I don't necessarily have criteria for that. I would just hope that we'd have a lot of robust conversations about it and be able to discuss, what we see in the data and whether we feel like we're on track or not to meet that objective.
Okay, and thank you. I didn't look through the slide thoroughly, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Heather, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Morales. Two suggestions for metrics in two specific areas. The first being your transit-centered growth. I think it would be really helpful for Met Council to have a parking layer for the Twin Cities. And what I mean by that is land area that is devoted to surface and/or structured parking. Parking is an important metric in terms of understanding opportunities for development and how that development can impact transit investments. So that's my first suggestion as a metric we could look into adding. And then under housing, I'd really love to see a layer that shows vacant parcels in the Metropolitan Council service area.
Fabulous ideas, thank you.
Go ahead, Jared.
I got a question for the lady on the right. What's the difference between regional and Met Council objectives? Like, there's a issue you talked about.
The regional
Planning,
measures and Met Council measures?
Let's see, I forget what the word you used. Regional something and compared to Met Council something. Yeah, measures, yes.
Slide 7, regional measures compared to Met-Council measures.
Yes, what's the difference? Isn't the Met Council the regional planning?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is some overlap, but there is also a distinction. So the Met Council measures are really about what we as a council are doing. So our grants, our investments, our programs that we as a council are doing. The regional measures are more about what our partners are doing. So we recognize that, in the context of climate change, we have a lot of city and county work going on to adapt and mitigate to a changing climate. So the regional measures are meant to capture that work and bring it forward.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I got like a comment to make. I think a land use policy is better. I'd like to see more local control over that, and I'll tell you why. I think cities, people who get elected mayors and city councils have more of a finger on the pulse of their community. I think the Met Council, with their overview, I think it should be more locally controlled. In here, I read you say, ensure that people in all types of communities find housing opportunities that align with their needs. Well, I think if it's more local control and then controlled by builders, if they think they could find people to rent apartments, they'll build an apartment building. It shouldn't be mandated that a particular city or something should build apartment building to have like a 3 or 5 to 1, per acre kind of a thing. That's just kind of my thoughts. I'd like to hear your reaction to that comment.
Yeah, I'll just say, we mentioned that the land use measurement slate has more regional indicators and regional measures than other areas, our water folks, our housing folks. They have more Met Council measures because they are more directly involved in that work. But the Met Council's involvement in land use is a little bit more distanced because of that relationship with the local level. So, yeah.
I would just add to what Sarah said, that when we look at the actual measures for land use, they reflect those local decisions. Comp plan amendments and changes to land uses, increased intensity of land use. So I think actually the measures that we have here are reflecting and trying to capture data about that local work and those local decisions, and just rolling that up to the region and providing that picture. So certainly not about a mandate or anything like that. It's really just reflecting the sort of compliance, but then also, where that's going above and beyond for those land use policies that are part of Imagine 2050 that local governments will be responding to in comprehensive planning and beyond. Yeah.
Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, but like right now we want to look at which of these 8 objectives that we have that we want to dig in more as a land use advisory committee to get more information, more data points, to actually have more focused conversation just on a couple of them here today?
Yeah, I think that in our experience, it helps to kind of look at the specific measures, but like in a confined, or like in a, just a slice kind of way, because otherwise it gets kind of overwhelming quickly. So yeah, we could take any of, we sort of are starting to touch on it now. So I have slides that I think better reflect or like provide the specific measures that we could pull up.
Okay. Jerry?
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify my position a little bit. I'm not anti-Met Council's planning.
Sure.
You need somebody in charge of overall.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you break it down into smaller sections, I think local control is always better, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead, Lana.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess I also wanted to just ask a question around, so we're going to measure these outcomes against some kind of direction or goal we're trying to get to. I assume Met Council has its own goals, and we'll be able to say, these measures help us understand the progress towards this. And those regional things, will they have their own separate goals? And you're going to be looking at the progress those partners have against their own, define where they want to be. Is that correct?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. We would love to see target and goal setting as part of this program. That has not been part of the conversation just yet. And part of it is because it's important to have the data in front of you when you're doing those discussions. And so, I can see that emerging, certainly as we hit the halfway point perhaps in the decade, and then definitely in the run up to our next regional development guide, which is wild to say because I know we just did it, but we'll be back at it soon enough. But it felt ambitious to try to have conversations around a specific target setting. There are programs at Met Council that do have targets. And so if that's already established, we'll make sure that that's reflected in the information that we have. Where we don't have that currently established, I think that's part of the work ahead. Yeah.
I'd be interested in looking at natural systems and housing for all. Get a little bit more information on what we have on the natural systems.
I'm going to use the mouse for this because I have to click in a specific place for this to work. Yeah. So here in Objective 4, Natural Systems, you can see the description there. And then also, we didn't try to squeeze all of the policy here as well. So I can just say, or re-summarize, that some of the themes of the policies under this objective are around identifying and connecting natural systems, especially in overburdened communities, and supporting wildlife and pollinator habitats along with public and ecosystem health. So just to add just a little bit more context to what natural systems in this objective is looking at. So with that, you can see the measures here. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions as we're able. But we have 3 regional indicators that are looking at, open space and the balance of the built environment versus open space or natural acreage, and how how that relates to growth in the region. Also, our tree canopy coverage, which we have through our growing shade tool, and also the Met Council's role in the community tree planting program. And then we have our regional measures. So what are local governments doing to kind of clean up contaminated land? I think we get that through Minnesota brownfields or a similar data source to that. It might be a couple that we piece together for that. And the change in acreage that's under conservation easements. So as we see more efforts to protect those areas, we should see that acreage number increase. And that's like in many different areas, parks and so forth, right? And then also this last one around policies and programs adopted by local governments to advance climate resiliency, but certainly natural systems are part of that. That would be one of those measures that actually come from a new effort to try to capture what that looks like at the local level and then roll it up to the regional level. When it comes to Met Council measures, one of the ways we contribute to, the protection or enhancement of the environment is to our own TBRA program through our Livable Communities Act, right? So we're granting cleanup things, to make sure that land can be, either developed or perhaps rewilded, if that's the appropriate use. So those are some of the things we're looking at for that objective.
May, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm going to the equity slide here, and I think this is super helpful for me to understand, writing it out about remedying past and present discriminatory land use practices. So I'm thinking about, the whole conversation that we are having around rethinking I-94, and how land was taken from folks who lived in there, especially the Rondo community, and also what it looks like present day today is it means that just by your zip code you have just higher increases in likelihood of having asthma there too. So I would encourage you to think about that as well too for the equity piece here in measuring that.
Thank you.
Can I add, Chair Ross, can I add that I think it would be really interesting as an equity measure in this chapter to correlate the historic practice of redlining and the economic impact on those neighborhoods, which is fairly well accounted for in data sets locally. And so I think that would be a helpful thing as well. Thank you for bringing that up.
Chair,
Go ahead,
can I
John.
just clarify, are we talking about natural systems now, or are we giving comments on any portion?
We are going to talk about 2 or 3 of them.
Okay.
But if you want to talk about equity or another different one,
Okay.
feel free to.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say, I guess a general question or feedback is if an indicator seems irrelevant to that topic or likely to lead to a bad conclusion, an inaccurate conclusion, is that important? Or is it okay, sort of like the more data the merrier and the relevance of the data is to be determined in how it's used, not how it's aggregated?
I hope that most of our measures seem relevant to the topic. I do think that what will happen is once we actually put the data together and look at it, we might be like, oh, this isn't like, there's like too many things to unpack here. It's like in theory it sounded like it would be useful or helpful, but I do think there will be kind of an opportunity to, once we have the data in front of us, to look at it together and say, is this meaningful? Is this contributing? Is there some way we need to tweak this? Is there some way we need to recontextualize that? The measures aren't meant to be used individually. They're meant to be paired with other things that provide context. And so that's why we've organized them into the objectives. And we've done that for every policy area because our experience with 2040 projects, as well as just with some other projects locally and nationally, are just that it's really hard to pin the success of something on 1 or 2 data points. And so we are taking that more maximalist approach because we expect some to fall to the wayside, we expect some to be added, and that relevancy question, I think, is just going to be a perpetual thing. We hope we're starting there, but it just might evolve, and we may find that something that seemed like a good idea just doesn't fit or doesn't contribute to the understanding.
Okay. Well, I will say just briefly, since it was not a focus area, transit center growth, I'm a little bit concerned about including the VMT and greenhouse gases in that area, just knowing that like the largest change in recent history to that had nothing to do with transit center growth, but COVID and telework, and that doesn't really indicate that we're doing well at mass transit in the region, it just indicates that circumstances changed very abruptly. And it's just a general decline in VMT that unfortunately is not because people are switching to the bus, but just because travel patterns change, and it does not indicate that the region is doing anything right, it's just that circumstances happen to change for the better. Back to natural systems, I was curious, well, first off, growth rate for impervious surface acreage per household, I really love that metric. I think that's a really cool way to frame it, and I think it, just as information standing alone, I think it's a great way to counter perhaps perceptions people might have of a more urban area as like not environmentally connected because it looks more paved over. I am curious the proportion of region-wide open space acreage, like what counts as open space acreage? Is that all land that doesn't have something paved on it, or is that like parks and public open spaces?
This is where I'm like really reaching for it because, as I said, a lot of measures here. That one is about parks and any undeveloped space, I believe. The reason I'm kind of questioning it is because actually the one you mentioned previously, the impervious surface growth, that's actually a measure that we borrowed from CMAP in Chicago. That's one of the things that they look at. And I want to say that the one that you also just mentioned about the proportion of open space acreage to population is also one of their measures that we thought, oh, that's a great idea. I think the idea here is to be inclusive in what we're saying is open space, but not so much in a way where we're like, it's not going to be every little micro parcel, and also we don't want it to include things that are maybe not like meaningful interactions with natural systems. So I think we'll have to look at our own land use data and try to parse and understand what should be in and what should be out, and that'll come in like the operationalizing of that measure.
Okay, my only concern there was just if it did include sort of private open space
that's not really,
that's
accessible.
Not the case. Okay.
Yeah.
I would just say the thing that occurred to me is like a Costco that has a big berm of like heavily fertilized land. Is that counting the same as like a community garden full of like native plants?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
And I don't think we would even have, I don't even think our land use data gets really granular, but I don't even think we could do it that. Okay. So that'll save us from ourselves, perhaps. The data don't allow us.
I have two questions for you, and I don't expect an answer, it's just thoughts, right?
Sure, yeah.
When I think about natural systems, one of the things I think about is giving value to collaboration, right? So I serve on a watershed board, and we saw recently a development plan within the city that's built out, right? And they've got some drainage issues and some surface water quality issues. And their developer actually worked with and reached out to the watershed to say, hey, we've got this opportunity, we want to do things to help with the stormwater remediation. I think recognizing that that's a significant movement forward, they don't necessarily have to do those kind of things, but going at that above and beyond to do collaborative regional benefits, especially in cities that are built out, right? There's not a lot we can do to change the percentage of our open spaces, but how we utilize them, I think is impactful. And then the second thing that I'd say, so I am all about developing our natural spaces for nature in particular. One of the things I think that is impactful as well, and it kind of gets into an equity thing, is the distance that your population has to the nearest natural space, right?
Yes.
It's a really good indicator.
Yes. And just to respond quickly, if I may, I think that the Trust for Public Lands, we have incorporated the Trust for Public Lands, I want to say it's a walk score, that it reflects that access piece in a more granular way. We've included that under our natural systems, like under the regional goal natural systems. Yep. So, that's the sort of probably the best proxy, that we're going to get. Difficult to calculate, so we're grateful that they do that for us, yeah. and we can compare ourselves to other metro areas with that information.
My question is on the third bullet point in the regional measures, the programs and policies adopted by local governments that advance climate resiliency. I think it's a very important thing to look at. I'm wondering, all the other measures seem to be like net change in acreage or more quantifiable things. And I'm wondering how you're measuring programs and policies that can vary drastically between communities.
That is an excellent question, and I have a very non-excellent answer, which is just to say that because that is one of our new data development areas, how exactly we can summarize that, or how we weigh those programs together, we recognize that they don't all have the same level of impact. So I think a sort of an example or a parallel could be, the council already does an annual survey of the local programs and policies used to support affordable and life cycle housing. So you have things like renter protections, TIF, just a cavalcade of different ideas are represented there. And then those things are reported to the legislature in our annual report card. So we would design a survey that kind of tries to, again, offer like a wide range of options for people to report for governments to report what they're up to. But when we summarize that information and share that back out, we will have to be very clear about those different program types and what has kind of more impact, and that might even change based on the community too, right? If the city of Minneapolis or St. Paul do something with like a high population, or that might have to be weighed a little differently than the same strategy in another area where it might be still a very valid approach, but just maybe not having that same level of impact. So we're thinking about those things, but we haven't sorted it out yet. That is one of the programs that we will absolutely be working closely with, like a technical advisory group of local governments to discern and talk about. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Chair, I did have, just on the open space proportion measurement, and I wanted to clarify, make sure I understood. We're talking about like guided open space or intentional open space as opposed to sort of undeveloped land that might otherwise be guided for commercial or residential. We don't count that as open space because we know at some point it's not going to be open space. Am I understanding that correct?
Yes, I think that is safe to say. As far as like what exact categories in our generalized land use database, we will summarize that. I can't give you, but yes.
Right,
yeah.
Because I know a lot of people in communities think of vacant undeveloped land that might be guided for certain uses as open space.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure
It's like,
how we were going to be.
Right, open for now. Yeah, that's a great point though, thank you.
Go ahead, Lana.
Can I ask a question about process? So I assume you have a process you're going to go through to kind of actually fish out and say what are the right things to be measuring. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit about your process to actually identify these things?
Yes. Actually, Sarah wrote up some ideas. So when in the creation of this program, this was not just Sarah and I. We worked with staff in all of these different policy areas to really, number one, dig into their data. There's like, even though we're community development research, there's a lot of data out there that we didn't know about. So that was exciting. But then also, really digging into their policies because they're the experts in their policy area. And so we are going to continue to utilize that staff work group to not only be in communication with them about obtaining this data and creating, the sustainable way of using it, but then to also sit down and together look at the information. Is it accurate? Is it making sense? How is it meaningful? And use some of that staff input in the creation of the dashboard that we'll have publicly available. And so that is an ongoing or iterative process. That process will happen not just when like now at the front end of things. It will be kind of every time they update that data, we want to kind of validate that the update they expect on or that they see on their end is what we're seeing, right? But then also to make sense of what we're seeing together and make sure that that information is displaying information that feels related to the policy, not just in theory, but in practice. And they're going to be the ones that have a better sense of that than Sarah and I, because we're not experts in their areas. So we're going to rely on that interpretive process together. We're sit down, look at that information. Anything we flag as like, uh-oh, this seems kind of off the rails a little bit. I think that we would name that in the dashboard and kind of ask for feedback about whether it should continue to be part of the program or not. So no unilateral decisions, and from the adopted slate that was part of the amendment, any deviations from that will be tracked and available for anyone to see. Why was something dropped? Why was something added?
And I assume from an equity perspective, there'll be a diverse group of people looking at it to make sure the measures we put out are actually meaningful to more than just data wonks, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, that's really going to be the exciting part, is when we're at that place where we can go to different community groups and sit down and say, what is valuable to you here? How are you interpreting this information? And really inviting them to share kind of a story that we put together and like capture that and make that available for everyone in the region to see. We want to make sure that the narratives and the dialogue are as transparent as the information. Yeah.
Thank you.
Christos?
Thank you. And forgive the sort of naiveness of these questions here, but as I'm reading, for example, Housing for All, it's ensure that people in all types of communities find housing opportunities that will align with their needs. And I see the measurement, both the indicators and the measures that are listed here. And for the first indicator, it's net change in the region's housing units by type. So I'm assuming that's low-density housing, high-density housing, medium-density housing. You're tracking that over time by type. And for me, the question is the proportion of those to each other. So even if you're tracking them each individually, it's really about the proportion that they have, and then that compared to the community's needs. And so I don't see, for example, something that is tracking what the community's needs are. Maybe I'm missing that comes from another source, but just because we have a change in less low density, more high density, what does that community actually need? I represent a community in Egan that has a lot of low density housing, and we really need high density housing. And I struggle to think that within 10 years we're going to be in a place where we are meeting the need. But I think really having a clearly defined need goal would be helpful to help also indicate what you're tracking and what your goal is in that tracking. And the same issue sort of comes up with the natural systems as I'm looking at it too, which is prioritize land use and development activities that protect, restore, and enhance natural systems at all scales. These, I really like the measures as well. It's connecting them with that outcome of protecting, restoring, and enhancing natural systems. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, how do we measure this area? So let's say we have more, hopefully less impervious surface, but likely more for going through development. But that as a holding in time, what is the water quality in this area that we're developing, or what is the pollution level in the soil that we're developing? Clean air is kind of hard because obviously, and if it's a running water source, it's also very hard, because you have rivers or streams that come through that area. To me, it's more the sitting water that's there and your systems that you're measuring, and then taking that over time as development happens, and is that increasing, for example, water quality, the developments that are happening, or is it actually impacting them negatively? But I think that's a way to connect those nexus of what you're measuring with the outcome of the goal that's listed. So those are just some of the things that I was looking for that spoke to me there.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. I think one of the ways that we will understand community needs is through the comprehensive plan updates that we receive, right? So every community in the region will be identifying something about what they're trying to do. And so that could be one source, but again, that's where dialogue comes in and making sure that we are understanding that what those needs are. We don't presume to know, but there are ways that those are expressed or articulated in those public planning documents, where I think that's one area that we would draw on. But I don't think we would set that goal or, you know, put that information like right there in the measure necessarily. But I really appreciate your point about the natural systems and how we can better connect that. So that's something we'll have to think more about. It kind of like flirts with the target setting, which again, I think is something that we want to get to, but we're not quite there yet. Yeah.
Dan, go ahead.
I was just going to add, most communities, as part of their comp plan updates or part of their regular routine, do things like, I shouldn't say most communities, many communities,
Yeah.
do things like housing studies,
Right.
which identify needs, whether it's based on affordability, whether it's based on types of housing, like a senior population needing certain types of housing or those types of things. So I think those measures can probably be gleaned from the comp plan in that sense, and it definitely makes sense to make sure that we identify the needs that we're trying to measure against, because that helps to make sure that we're measuring correctly. And just back to the equity one, I think in terms of that, looking at historically redlined districts and how is the population diversity in those areas compared to the broader area, those types of things can help with those evaluations of success in so it is very much about identifying the need and then matching the measures to see if we're getting there.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Lana.
I think need, you're spot on with need, because Gerald, I think you talked a few sessions ago about the need for workforce housing, right? And so I think our local things definitely should be driving some of our measures. With respect to the natural systems, beyond cleaning up pollution and having cleaner waters, I think there's also a long-term sustainability and resiliency that should be tied into here as well. I don't know what that looks like or what that is, but you can certainly go backwards, have development that actually takes you backwards, and I think understanding how do you keep moving forward.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, May.
I really appreciate this conversation because it's like, you know, jogging some ideas, but for the Housing for All, a piece I would also like for consideration and inclusion is about AMI levels, about like the different affordability levels in each communities as well.
Yes, that is one of our like disaggregation factors, is to look at that AMI. I think, yeah, it got a little clunky to like put AMI onto every data point in which we have it, but we will absolutely be looking at that wherever it is available to us.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other objectives or questions, Heather?
Just a quick question. On the housing objective, do we measure numbers of naturally occurring affordable units in the metro area and the decline in those numbers or increase in those numbers over time? I know that's a tricky one.
I appreciate that question a lot. It is like the white whale of data. It has truly been like something that researchers have across the region have been talking about trying to get at for at least a decade, since that 2015 NOAA study came out. Yeah. So there's been like snapshots, you know, but not that trend analysis. I think we're better at identifying where publicly subsidized housing is, right? Like that has an address, that has a, you know, a data set and a tax subsidy associated with it. So we can see that, but I really don't know or like of a source that's doing that trend analysis of naturally occurring affordable housing well. We do have a rent trends dashboard that relies on several different commercial databases that we subscribe to. So CoStar, and there's Zillow, maybe a couple others. They're kind of reflecting like what those that average rent might look like in communities, but that's still not quite like, you know what I mean, what you're describing. And so the second it ever happens, we are interested, we are on it, we still participate in those conversations with folks that are trying to put that data set together. It's just a really difficult one to crack, yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions or?
You know, I'll say it's really important, though, I think, to try to figure it out, because certainly we use NOAA as a strategy, right?
Yeah.
And being able to say, well, what does that mean? And are we losing ground because there's a lot more rental properties or a lot more investment in short-term rentals? And it's just that being able to quantify something to say, where are you on the scale?
A thought on that line is maybe there's a correlation between sort of age of build date of particular, housing versus the rents or the values if it's purchase housing. Might be something. I'm not saying I have the answer, but it came to mind as we were having the
Yeah,
conversation.
the issue is really getting the rent data. I
Right.
think that's the hardest
For
thing
sure,
to get
yeah.
your hands on, but yeah,
And there are sources for that out there, but it's not.
but they're
It's-
private sources,
They're-
unfortunately.
Well, they're private and they're also not comprehensive. And
Right.
so if you think about naturally occurring affordable housing as being some of those mom and pop landlord, that's actually the information we have like the least. Large multifamily buildings, those tend to be the ones that are in the CoStar databases or the commercial databases. So we're really like the data that where we think this would like most live is like the least accessible to us. And so we'll be, I'm sure, I would love to see this happen in like the remaining years of my career. We will see though. But if it happens, like I said, we are 100% interested in leveraging that information, however it will be helpful.
Any other objectives that we want to cover? Anybody? Jerry?
I would like to see, if you're asking the question, I'm very big on water. I think the current laws, you can trade this water low ground for this, so you can dig it up. I think if it's low ground now, it stays low ground. I would like to see more, whatever you want to call it, more enforcement or change of the laws to keep low grounds and those kind of areas low grounds. I can't, if you're a farmer and you're gonna sell off 100 acres, and if it's only because you tiled the ground that caused the wetlands to go, put them back into wetlands, because that's where our aquifers are getting their water. So, but I think whatever's low ground now stays low ground, work around it. If you don't like it, then don't buy up that piece of property. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jerry. Any other questions or objectives that we want to review?
Well, there certainly is a lot here, and we are more than happy to come back, or if you want to explore this more and pass along comments to us, we would love that as well. But the iterative nature of this program means that the conversation we have today is super valuable. We can take in these ideas, and they're immediately actionable in terms of vetting and adding things to the program. And that stays true for the rest of the decade. So this is not a one-shot thing. We would come back and continue to have these conversations. And I think even, when we have the data in front of us, then it'll even be a more like robust conversation than we can have right now with just ideas on slides. So really appreciate everyone's thoughts and comments today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen and Sarah. Up next, we've got update on the system statement hearings, and we got Lisa.
Good evening, committee members. I'm Lisa Barajas. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Division, filling in for Angelo in her absence, and hopefully we'll see her return soon. But in the meantime, the system statement hearings, which are directed under state law and prescribed timelines under state law, do not sleep for anybody, so we need to continue in our efforts. So I will, before I get into where we're at today, just as a reminder, the Metropolitan Council is required to provide notice to all local units of government within the 7-county region when we update or adopt new regional plans. And it's through a process that the legislature has deemed to call system statements. And we provide those statements to all 181 cities and townships and all 7 counties in the metro area within 9 months of adopting our regional plan. Regional plan was adopted in February, and we issued system statements in September. Local units of government, in many ways, these system statements serve as a notice that now it's locals' time to turn to updating their comprehensive plan. And for the most part, out of 181 communities or 188 system statements, by and large, folks are like, yep, that sounds like what you did in your plan. But it's always an opportunity to review those plans more specifically. Each system statement has a lot of content in it that's specific to that local unit of government. Their forecasts, community designations, what our maps for our regional systems look like for them. So where our interceptors are, where our lift stations are planned to be, where our transit lines are, those types of very specific to that particular community. We issued system statements in September, as I noted, and our sector reps, including Patrick and the broader team and local planning assistants, had many conversations with local governments about the contents of them. We had 29 communities raise issues. Many of those issues we were able to resolve through conversation, through clarity, providing corrections where we might have made mistakes. That's always going to happen because we're humans trying to distill a very large plan into 188 separate documents. So sometimes we put the wrong map in. And so we fix those things and get the right things out for them. So we make those corrections, make sure that we have the correct content for everybody, make sure that we've reflected changes that may have been recently made to local plans as well around where MUSA might be, for example, and making sure that those are all accurate. And then we did have a lot of communities also have just requests for clarifications about what something might mean within their system statement or what that next step in the process might be for their local planning process. Forecasts were our primary issue. They're always our primary issue. It was 10 years ago. It was 20 years ago. It's the place where communities either have the most questions that they want to talk through or where they're going to contest their system statement. We try to find resolution as much as we can through these conversations, and especially through those forecast changes. And there are places where we do have flexibility, especially when it is evidence-based, where we are seeing additional development that has in the pipeline that's been approved that maybe isn't accounted for within their plans or maybe hadn't been accounted for within our forecast modeling. So that's where we see those changes, and vice versa, where communities are saying, you know, I don't think that we can accommodate that much growth for one reason or another. And so we do make adjustments. We will be bringing a bulk amount of agreed upon forecast changes that have been discussed with local staff and with council staff. We'll be bringing that forward to the Community Development Committee here at the council. And then I don't know why that says August. It should say February. I don't know where I came up with August when I was writing that particular slide, because that doesn't make any sense. Maybe I was dreaming about summer. But we do continue to have communities where we did not come to a resolution. So I just wanted to walk through those steps, both on what the standards and state law say that if we cannot come to a resolution, that the city or local unit of government has the right to have a hearing in order to have the disagreement heard and by a set of folks that are not the council, and then a decision or determination made. These are kind of the high-level main steps for this process. We have a very detailed flow chart that I will not torture you with the details on, that get into much more detail. But really, as I had mentioned first, that very first step of we're looking to resolve all these issues because this is the basis for local land use planning. So we want to be able to ensure that local units of government have sufficient time to be doing their work and not tied up in disagreement with us. And our goal is to really help move in that direction. But if we don't come to a resolution on a particular issue, local governments do have the option to request a hearing, and they must do that within 60 days of receiving their system statement. That 60-day timeline has passed. That was in November. And we had a number of, it's not uncommon for local governments to say, I'm still talking with you, but I want to reserve my right to a hearing. And so that does happen as well as a part of that process. But for many communities, we're able to come to resolution. Once we move into a hearing process, the law states that we must hold that hearing within 60 days of receiving that request. However, the law has been changed to allow us to set a date that we mutually agree upon as well. The timeline for when we issue system statements always puts us in the holiday period, which is like the worst time to hold a hearing and no one's available. So it makes it a lot easier for just scheduling for everyone when we can agree to a different date that actually works for everybody. But then after the hearing is held, a report is sent to the Metropolitan Council within 30 days. And then that last big step in the process is that the Metropolitan Council makes a final determination on the matter within 30 days of receiving that report. The intent, again, is to move through the process quickly so that communities can then turn their focus to on their local planning process. So the details of where we're at today. We did have 5 formal requests for hearing, and they're just listed in alphabetical order here. And you will see that out of the 5 requests, 3 requested to be held at the Court of Administrative Hearings, which is one of the options that is identified in state law. And so we are working with those communities on scheduling through that administrative court that the state runs. And then one of those cities requested for a hearing to be held at the Land Use Advisory Committee, which is one of the main roles that this committee plays as well. Farmington at the top, sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over these bullets. Farmington at the top, we were able to come to a resolution with, and we were just working through our stipulated agreement that they are going to be withdrawing the request for a hearing, and we're just signing the paperwork on that. So no hearing will be held for them. On the remaining communities, I've summarized a little bit about what the high-level request is about, and kind of moving from top to bottom. Forest Lake has requested a change from their suburban edge community designation. They didn't propose a different designation, so it's something that will need to be part of their brief when they come forward, because that is a required element under the law. You can't just say we don't want that. You have to say what you would like as a part of that. They also had an upward forecast request as well as part of their hearing request. Hugo also was an upward forecast request that they wanted to see. North Oaks actually had a downward forecast request, but then also requested expansion of the metropolitan urban service area to accommodate failing septic systems across the whole of their entire community that we do not currently serve and have not planned to serve. That also would implicate a community designation change because they are outside of, most of the city is outside of our urban service area, and so they have a designation that is not for urban service. And then Oakdale request is also related to an upward forecast request.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Mr. Chair, thank you. So can you tell me what you mean by suburban edge community?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee member. Our community designations are the policy vehicle that we have in Imagine 2050. And this committee, I think prior to many of you being appointed, was deeply involved in creating those designations. The region is In our regional plans, we kind of separate the region into two buckets, our urban service area where we're providing regional wastewater service, and then we have community designations within that to differentiate between the different types of communities. Then we have our rural service area, so communities outside of the where we provide regional wastewater service. Rural service area is pretty straightforward. Those are agricultural, diversified rural, rural residential, and then rural centers that fall in that. Rural centers are kind of a hybrid. And then within our urban service area, we have 4 designations that differentiate between our most urbanized cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, St. Louis Park, and our developing edge suburbs, and then in between that. So we have 4 different designations, and suburban edge is one of those designations. It's the kind of lowest density expectation within the urban service area. I'm happy to share that content after this meeting as well, so you all can take a look at that. It's part of our land use policy, but is a foundational part of our work because it's how we integrate a lot of our investment decisions around our regional infrastructure capital plans. So this is a more detailed thing I wanted to provide. We will be providing more training for the Land Use Advisory Committee and working on scheduling. I thank you all for your responses to your availability as we're working to schedule both training as well as the hearing. We got the hearing first, but we'll be following up with making sure you have and feel comfortable with what it means to conduct a hearing at LUAC. But I just wanted to share this high-level slide. We'll go over this in much more detail in a training session about what these timelines mean. This is just more detail than what I had previously shared on the 3-column visualization, but really shows you in more detail a little bit more about the roles that the different entities play, what LUAC does, what local government how local government shows up in this process, where council staff might be doing work as well, and how those timelines work out in a little more detail. So I just wanted to show this more as a preview. That's something that will go into much more detail, but really is more for staff to ensure that we're moving along in this process as we're required to by state law, but and then also for you all to see where LUAC shows up in that process and then where it goes from there. So as I mentioned, we'll be providing a more detailed training that, the purpose of all of these hearings really is to give that local government the opportunity to be heard about their disagreement, to present their case, and to hear their proposed amendments to the system statement from a body that is not council staff, from somebody else. And so what we will be doing in our training is covering the roles in that process, what local governments are responsible for, what LUAC is responsible for, how the LUAC will be supported in that process. It won't be from me, it will be from external staff, so that we are trying to give as fair of a process as we can to the local unit of government in that. Even though we know that the committee, LUAC is advisory to the council, we still want to be sure that we aren't influencing the outcomes in that process or have an appearance of influencing outcomes by not providing separation of roles amongst our own staff and looking for external counsel to both support the LUAC as well as help run these processes. So we'll talk about those roles in a little more detail. We'll talk in more detail about those supports that will be provided, and then into the detail about how a hearing is conducted, what you should consider or not consider as part of, as it's guided in state law. And then, of course, answer any questions you might have about that process and what is entailed in a hearing. This is, hearings are not like, a trial court or in that fashion, but they are an opportunity to learn more about what the local government is presenting, what evidence they might have to show to support their case, as well as to hear from the council staff, their perspective in the matter, what led up to the decision, and any evidence in that regard too. It is a single hearing. It doesn't have multiple hearings as you would see in any sort of other law and order type case. It's not that dramatic, but it is an opportunity for that local government to be heard and to present their case. So more to come. I'm happy to take any questions today, but I did just want to preview that for you all and to also just assure you that we will be working towards getting you the supports that you need and the training that's needed ahead of conducting that hearing. We, of course, want you to feel comfortable in that process. And of course, at the end of the day, we want to ensure that the process is fair for that local unit of government and that they get their fair hearing. So happy to take any questions if you have any.
Mr. Chair?
Christos?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, so my question was simply, and I don't know how much you can answer this, but the decision to have the hearing in front of the LUAC as opposed to the Court of Administrative Hearings, what goes into that decision?
Mr. Chair.
That's a long answer.
No, committee member, it's a great question. It actually is the local government's determination. They get to select where they'd like to be. Different, over the years that I've been at the council, we've heard a lot of different rationale for that. This body is a body of peers for a local unit of government. You do have elected officials here, so in some ways, local units of government find comfort in that versus a court of administrative hearings where you might get a judge who is not that familiar with land use planning, for example. It's possible that you do, but sometimes you don't. You just get who you're assigned. And there may be other considerations that the local unit of government has when they're making that selection, but it's entirely their choice.
Jerry?
Mr. Chair, my question is along the same lines. Do you think these other, 4 out of 5 chose to go that way? Do you think they went that way because they didn't feel they'd get an honest result by going to LUAC? I mean, since LUAC is maybe part of the Met Council or whatever?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee member, that is certainly a potential. I know it does seem sometimes like you might not if you have an advisory body to a council, or to the council, but similar to how local cities have boards of appeals within their own organization, that's how this body was imagined by the legislature, was to hear that sort of appeal process. But certainly I wouldn't be surprised if a local unit of government said, well, you picked those people, so how do we know we'll get a fair shake? I wouldn't say that would be out of the realm of possibility and thinking, but certainly our goal is to ensure that the local unit of government gets a fair hearing, no matter what venue they're selecting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Lana?
My question about how soon before the hearing can we expect to see the material? Is it just this 3 days or?
Great question, Mr. Chair, committee member. No, you do get hearing materials much earlier in the process. So when we get into the training, we will go into more detail about when you expect to hear, because it is prescribed in law what those timelines are, and they are a couple of weeks. So those materials, it's not like, just 3 or 5 days. They are a couple of weeks, and sometimes those materials can be significant. Having participated in a hearing in the last cycle 10 years ago, we had 2 6-inch binders of exhibits that we were sharing, and this was at the Court of Administrative Hearings, and that was just the council's evidence. There were other things that the city had produced in that hearing. So yes, there are, the court set longer timelines because they expect to see a lot of material.
John, go ahead.
Maybe this is better addressed in what our 6-inch binder will say, but what is the incentive for a city to want a higher forecast, and what's the incentive for Met Council to not want to grant that?
Mr. Chair, committee member, that is a good question. And maybe what I will do is, there are a number of reasons that local units of governments may request a higher forecast. A variety, sometimes they're aspirational, sometimes because, well, just for there could be any variety of reasons, but growing more always seems to be where folks want to go. Not very many communities want to grow less. But I think especially when they're thinking about investments in local infrastructure to support growth that they may have made or maybe had on the horizon. The council in our forecasting, and for those of you who have been on this committee longer, you've heard from our forecast team about the methodology we use and why we consider forecasts as stringently as we do, because it does relate to the investments that we make available for supporting that growth as well. We always want to ensure that we're timely in those major capital investments, and if anyone's been involved in local decisions around extending trunk sanitary sewer, you know it's not an overnight decision. It's a multi-year process to line up, and then you get bids, and then you got to build it. Like, those are the things that we're thinking of at the regional scale as well. So we want to be timely, but we also don't want to overbuild, because that costs the region money, and if we're not using it, the rest of us are still paying for it. So it's why we're really, why we always consider much more specifically what we're looking for in that, both within the regional context of how are we actually growing as a region, what are all the factors influencing that growth, and what is the likelihood of development for actually occurring that's being requested in front of us.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh,
I guess just one final question. So how often is it? Once every 10 years that you have something like this? So you really haven't had a hearing in front of the LUAC since 2015, 16, sorry?
Good question. Thank you for that, Mr. Chair, committee member. We issue the big system statements, the ones for our decennial, our 10-year plan update. We do that once every 10 years. And then we also issue smaller system statements, because a couple of our plans, our regional parks plan and our regional transportation plan, are required by state law to be updated every 4 years. We consider those interim updates the smaller system statement process, and we don't do major updates there. Hearings are held at the 10-year one, and that's where I don't recall any time where we've ever had those smaller system statement issuances result in a hearing. 10 years ago, we had a similar number of requests. About 5 had come in for hearings, and only one of those requests went to a hearing. The last time we held a hearing at LUAC was actually 20 years ago, and that was the city of Lake Elmo after our lawsuit that had gone to the Supreme Court.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, so we're very lucky then.
Yes, you're very special.
All right, with no other questions, any comments for the group? Anybody? Jerry?
You know, I think all our meetings should be in this room. They seem to be more fun. So I move that we have them all here.
I think our hearing will be in this room.
All right, with nothing else, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.